Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Digging Deeper moment number 200. The purpose of our Digging Deeper moments is to take God's Word to God's world, and we are so glad that you've joined us. If you would, please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you. It's hard to believe, but this is our 200th Digging Deeper moment. And tonight, we'll be continuing in our series, God Speaks Our Language. Last week, we looked at two things which we have to keep in mind when it comes to understanding what a biblical text says and means. The first is content, what's actually stated there. And secondly, context. That's the circumstances around what's said. For more on those, please go to Digging Deeper number 199. Tonight, I want to add another C to the list of C's. There's content, there's context, and also the third one is contrast. When reading the Bible, you have to learn to take note of contrast. How what God says contrasts the beliefs, customs, and practices of the time. As we've been saying, God uses accommodation when He speaks in the Bible. Accommodation being the use of one's person's language, their knowledge base, their beliefs, their customs, and their culture. He uses all that stuff when He speaks to them. But more often than not, in doing so, God actually contrasts what people believe and practice and know. And this shows that God's use of accommodation is about communication and not affirmation. When He is using accommodation, He's not agreeing with or affirming already pre-existing beliefs. And quite often, He's outright contradicting and correcting them. For instance, in Genesis 11, chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, it describes the construction of the Tower of Babel, and it does so in a way that is very similar to other ancient writings concerning these towers. In ancient times, pagan societies built temples called ziggurats. These towers had a set of stairs on the front, or maybe leading up to it that wrapped around, but they had stairs. And these stairs, however, weren't for the people to go up and meet the gods. These stairs were for the gods to come down and bless the people. And so there's a cultural reality there that we have to kind of understand reading into the story. Now, the Tower of Babel was the first of these ziggurats that were ever built, and it's kind of like the prototype, and there's still that remain to this day. Here's a picture of the great ziggurat of Dur, and I'm going to get this probably wrong, Dur Kur-Igalzu. In 2010, this picture was taken, and it's found in Mesopotamia. Then there's also the great tower, or the great ziggurat of Ur. And you can see the stairs running up, and I want you to kind of get a mental picture here of what the Tower of Babel could be like. Now, these are just a couple of examples, to kind of solidify this image in your mind. Now, when we come to Genesis 11, 1 through 9, it tells us that people made a tower like this that would reach to heaven. Now, they didn't do this, as I said, to go up to heaven themselves. They did this so heaven or the gods would come down to them. That's how ancient Mesopotamian religion worked. And Genesis 11, 1 through 9 is written with this in the background. So when we look at the context of this text, this story, and we understand the history and the geography and some of the things that were going on back then, we really begin to get a clear picture of what the content of the Bible is actually saying. The irony is that this is exactly what happened. That when they built this tower to reach heaven, for heaven to come down, that's exactly what happened. But instead of the gods, plural, coming down, the one true God, Yahweh, He came down. So this is accommodation. This is speaking in the language and understanding even of the religious culture at the time. And it shows us that this is historically based at a certain time, but it's also contrasting the beliefs of the religious beliefs of the people, not affirming them at the time. So it's not copying them. Genesis chapter 11, verses 4 through 5 says, Then they said to one another, Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. This story is very consistent with what we know of the ancient world's worship. They built these cities and these towers. The two were associated with each other, and they built them. The city was for the people, the priests, to work in them so that they could feed the gods, so the gods would come down and bless them. That's how that religion worked. But just because this story is similar to what this ancient worship practice was, it does not mean that God was approving of this ancient worship. And in fact, just the opposite was true. Yes, building the tower brought God down, but God came down to scatter them, which was the whole thing they were trying to avoid in the first place. And so God is correcting them. He's not copying or affirming them. Genesis 11:7-8 says, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building. If anything, God's use of accommodation here doesn't show that God agrees with them at all, or that the story borrows from ancient pagan sources. What it shows is that this story is historically consistent with what we are now confirming through archaeology and history and literature that we know now about the ancient world, that this story is consistent with the background. And so that instead of agreeing with them, God disagreed with them. He contrasted, contradicts, and corrects what they believe. He doesn't affirm it. The truth is that in the Bible, God often contradicts the very things the people to whom He's speaking already believe and practice. And this is a truth I believe that the modern church in America has to get a hold of. Because for years, American culture was consistent with, or at least tolerant of, what the Bible teaches. This is because America was built on Judeo-Christian foundation, which meant that much of our everyday experiences and much of our culture were in agreement with, or at least not hostile to, what the Bible teaches. But this has all changed in the last 70 years. Now we live in a post-Christian America, and we find that much of what our culture believes and practices is at odds with the teachings of the Bible, which means the Bible contrasts and contradicts much of our cultural experiences today. And this makes a lot of Christian followers uncomfortable, and they may not know why, but it does make them uncomfortable. But it's not because the Bible has changed, it's because our culture has changed around us. Christians need to get used to seeing how the Bible contrasts, contradicts, and challenges our culture. The truth is that the church in America has lived as the home team for a long time, but now we're the visiting team. So we need to get used to the idea of contrast and challenge and contradiction. Because for the most part, the Bible was written while God's people were the visiting team, that they were at odds with, they contrasted, and they contradicted the world around them in which they lived, which is why what God often says actually challenges or corrects what they believe and practice. This is why there are a number of verses in the Bible, like 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 through verse 17, which say, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever." Yes, God speaks our language, but He does so to communicate with us. Next week, we'll look at why God needs to challenge and correct what people practice and believe in the first place. Now, if this lesson's helped you, please share it with a friend, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check out our Sunday Morning Live podcast on either Apple or Spotify. And hey, if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please don't forget to do that. That will help us greatly. Thank you. I hope to see you next week.